We have with us on the phone Dove of Oneness from the National Economic Stabilization and Recovery Act, otherwise known as NESARA. Welcome to Contact Talk Radio, Dove.
Hi.
How are you?
I have to stop right now and just mention that the real name of NESARA is not on the Internet. You cannot find it.
Oh.
Except in my information, and that is because the U.S. Supreme Court justices who had the NESARA law drafted put a gag order on the real name and on all of the true law information, so you cannot find it anywhere. There is a prototype NESARA bill on the Internet that is meant to give people a taste of NESARA, a hint of what the real one is like, because they were hoping, the justices and their allies were hoping to get some feedback. It has turned out to be used as a disinformation tool by some of the websites on the Internet, not by ours, 4Winds10 or NESARAnow.com, but by the NESARA.org people who are actually the Bush regime attempting to keep the NESARA law from being announced. So the correct name of NESARA, which I was given permission to tell this last fall, is the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. And those two words make this an entirely different legal entity, and they are not to be confused. The one on the Internet was put there initially in a good way to be utilized as feedback, but it's been terribly distorted by the NESARA.org people who are the Bush regime, and it simply you just have to cut both of those totally apart because they don't relate at all.
Well, it's a good thing we brought this up then.
Absolutely, because some people will go out, hear NESARA, and type it in and think that this is the authentic one.
Right.
Yes, so it's perfect that this has come out.
So let's start, Dove, with your involvement. How did you get involved in NESARA, and give us some background for our listeners about NESARA and how it came about.
Okay. I was researching some other things a few years ago, alternative health therapies and technologies and energy technologies and so on. And in researching these things and some humanitarian improvement projects that are coming down the road, I ran across this information. And the instant I ran across it, I knew this is it. This is what we have been waiting for thousands of years on this planet, to change everything and lift everything up. This is it. This is the pivotal public event to the shift, the great shift of the ages, from the age of darkness, which we have been in, into the age of light and humanitarianism and upliftment. And this is the public, physical, nuts and bolts way we're getting there. And that's why I'm here, that's why I'm on the planet, is to make sure this gets done. And a lot of other people are here for the same reason. It's time for this massive change to occur for the better of all people on the planet. And when I discovered NESARA, it was actually being leaked by naval intelligence people. Naval intelligence officers and agents were talking about this secret law that had been passed in March 2000, and I heard about it in June 2000. And this law was supposed to have been implemented in the year 2000 before the elections. It was signed by Clinton on October 10, 2000, and I had that verified by an NSA agent, and we had this ready to go, but it has been blocked by what I call the dark agenda forces, the dark agenda groups on the planet who continue to manipulate and control our governments, our banking, and a lot of other things. So I'm going to talk about what NESARA does, and people will quickly see some of the major shifts this creates. It abolishes the IRS entirely. Instantly, the minute NESARA is announced, the IRS stops collecting taxes, is allowed only to do refunds for income taxes, and some of their personnel will be put into a new division because the revenue for the government will come from a new national sales tax on new non-essential items only. So it gets rid of the IRS, and it creates a new kind of revenue for the government, which is a sales tax that does not hurt people because it's not on used items and it's not on essential items, It is on new items, and even there is a certificate that people will receive where a certain amount of new items every year will be exempted from this. So it immediately gets rid of one of the biggest bullies on the planet, the IRS, and takes that bully boy out of the federal government's hands and totally abolishes it. Some other things it does is it forgives credit card debt, mortgage debt, car loans, personal loans, refinancing loans, home equity loans, anything that you have that is bank-related debt. And one of the things it does is it pays the banks $8,500 per credit card account to zero out those balances on the credit card. So the banks are being paid to zero out these different kinds of loans and credit card debts. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, tremendous bank fraud has been done to the people of the U.S. and frankly around the world in most other countries where this same kind of fiat money system exists, like the Federal Reserve. And two, because of the fraud, and the U.S. Supreme Court found there was fraud, and I'll explain where that comes from, they ruled there had to be remedies, financial remedies. And so that is what the credit card debt, the mortgage debt forgiveness, and so on is all about, is financial remedies for humongous fraud. In addition, the bank records of the old banking system must be zeroed out. So this is also an accounting process to zero out all of these debts, which cannot be converted to anything righteous. They are so messed up, they cannot be converted. They must be zeroed out. And we will have a new banking system, a new U.S. Treasury bank system, and new U.S. Treasury currency backed by precious metals. That will be instant. The minute NESARA is announced, the Federal Reserve will be essentially abolished and absorbed as far as facilities and personnel into the U.S. Treasury bank system, and we will have new currency coming out. We will be exchanging the worthless Federal Reserve money we have now for new U.S. Treasury money that's backed by precious metals. In addition, NESARA requires the immediate resignations of Bush and Cheney and all of the current regime and the Congress. And this is because there has been a history of fraud and of manipulation and of taking away our constitutional rights for many decades, not just the last few years, but many decades. And in order to clear the whole mess out and start fresh, we are going to have mass resignations and new elections within 120 days of NESARA's announcement. NESARA requires that a president-designate and vice president-designate be sworn in immediately in the first 15 minutes of the NESARA announcement process. And the NESARA president-designate will declare peace. And one of the reasons he will do that is because peace is what is necessary for the international banking changes that will follow NESARA to occur. We will have this happening in our country. Other countries are also poised to announce their own new banking and currency systems based on precious metals. We are essentially going back to what people call a gold standard, and that is for higher economic security and to get us out of this mess that the governments have gotten us into, which basically our birth certificates, our properties are backing the government. That should end the banking system. That should not be the case. And the Federal Reserve banking system is very fraudulent. So right away what we see is, and that as soon as the designates are sworn in, they're going to go over this, the president-designate will go over these major points I've just discussed. And they will declare peace, and they will call the U.S. troops back to the country.
Now, let me ask you something, Dov. This obviously sounds like a win situation for the people, but, you know, there's got to be a balance. So who loses on something like this?
All the people who've been controlling your life. Okay. Your government officials, many of them are just totally corrupt. The banking system is very corrupt, and it's the few who have been controlling the masses for decades, and this hasn't been an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in doing my research on why NESARA changes things and rolls back to 1933, for example, we find that Roosevelt made us the enemy of the country, made us the enemy of the government. And all he did was change a few words in the Trading with the Enemy Act. And we were suddenly the enemy of the country. Did you know you didn't have to get a driver's license before 1933?
I had heard that, yes. Yes,
and
I've
the
heard
reason is that the legal meaning of license is to permit someone to do something that otherwise would be illegal. So all of the business licenses, all of the driving licenses, all of the Social Security, get your Social Security number requirements, those were all after 1933 when we became the enemy of the government, of the federal government, by what Roosevelt did. And from then on, we were no longer in constitutional law. We have not been in constitutional law since March of 1933. And within a few days of being sworn in, Roosevelt had a couple of laws passed in Congress. The Congress didn't even read those laws. That's the same thing they did with the Patriot Act. It wasn't read. Nobody had a printed copy of it. And it's this kind of manipulation of our people in times of stress, and often the stress is manipulated. Now I'm going to explain where NESARA came from. It came from a 1993 ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was the accumulation of 30 years of lawsuits by the Farmers Union up and down state courts, finally getting to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they proved that the U.S. government and the banking system were in collusion to defraud the people and had created tremendous fraud against the people, had foreclosed on farm properties, and then they also found along the way, because these farmers who were taking these cases up and down the courts were being harassed by the IRS, they went and investigated that and took into that U.S. Supreme Court the fact that the IRS had never been ratified, that was a complete illusion. There was manipulated information, there was falsified information showing the states had ratified the amendment, but it never had been ratified, and it was a complete lie, and always has been. So they proved that in court. They proved the fraud of the banking system in foreclosing on their farms when the bankers had big farming corporations in the wings waiting to buy these individual farms up. And they proved the collusion of federal government officials who were actually looking the other way, being paid by the banks to look the other way to help in this robbing of our farms. So we had a great deal of things that came to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1993, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the farmers were correct, and then they had to come up with how to fix the problems. So they built coalitions of economists, monetary system experts, constitutional law experts, all kinds of experts in these various fields, and they came up with a series of changes that had to be implemented in the federal government. And they worked initially, there was a group of justices of the U.S. Supreme Court who were assigned to this project. And that's how rulings of the U.S. Supreme Court get done, is that the justices, when the ruling is made, then certain justices are appointed to work the project and get the rulings implemented. So initially they worked with the Clinton administration to get these things implemented in a series of contracts called accords. And the Clinton administration didn't want to resign. So what they did was they took the U.S. Supreme Court to the World Court, and they attempted to get the World Court to overthrow what the U.S. Supreme Court had decided. However, the World Court in 1998 did uphold the major points of the U.S. Supreme Court's rulings and found that these changes were valid and necessary. And in 1999, the true NESARA law, the National Economic Security and Reformation Act, was put into Congress. It was introduced into Congress. Now, you can imagine the Congress people have to resign, so they dragged their feet on it. They did not want to pass it. And in March 2000, there was a required meeting of members of Congress, and they passed it at that point.
Deb, I want to take you back to something here, and we've got a question here. What is the World Court? It's not something I've heard of before.
It's the International Court of Justice at The Hague, Netherlands.
Okay.
It is the court that decides disputes between countries, and because who has the jurisdiction?
Right.
And it is actually in the news every once in a while. But I call it the World Court rather than that big long name.
Makes things simple, doesn't it?
So now I want to explain, too, a lot of people say, well, we just saw the U.S. Supreme Court hand Bush Jr. the Oval Office. Why do we want to believe these people are getting this done?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you what happened. When in October of 2000, after Clinton was persuaded to sign the True NESARA law, which had been sitting on his desk for a number of months, there was supposed to be the announcement of NESARA at that point, before the November elections. There requires a great deal of help from many different quadrants to get this done. And one of them is the U.S. military. We have to have the U.S. military supporting this, obviously, so we can have a peaceful transition and not have for instance, the Bush regime able to use the military against getting this done. Well, what happened was that there were some people in the military who betrayed their agreement to help support getting this done. And some of the things the military does is, for instance, there's a great deal of gold and precious metals sitting in various vaults around the country, but not in government hands for the obvious reason. Especially with this regime, it would all be stolen in a second. So there are places where the military are guarding these huge caches of gold and silver and platinum, and have been for a long time. And they are deputized units that the U.S. Supreme Court is able to use in this way. Some of those U.S. military groups that were supposed to be supporting bringing in this gold and putting it into the proper places once NESARA was announced, and doing some other things to help with the new currencies being moved out to the banks in a secure fashion and so on. Some of those people betrayed us in October of 2000, and so the announcement was not made. Then we had the fiasco in Florida, which of course.
Well, that was just this is unbelievable.
Yeah, and the people that I have named the people who are working to bring this forward, the justices and their allies. I've named them the White Knights, and that's a term I used from the Wall Street Journal. My background is business and computers, and a White Knight is someone who rescues a vulnerable company from a hostile takeover.
I want to make a mention here for those who don't remember the Florida fiasco of the election. So just a little bit of a memory jar there. With all the things that have happened in the news, these things tend to be forgotten. So I want to make sure that the public remembers this.
Yeah.
Oh, they will, because I'm going to remind them.
Thank you, Doug.
You go, Doug.
and so, some people have said, I just want to make it real clear, I get my term, the White Knights, from the Wall Street Journal. I have a business degree, I have a social sciences degree, I've been in computers and business for 20-some years. That's where my focus is. It is not a racist comment. It is a business term that you can look up in the Wall Street Journal. For 20 or 30 years, they've used this term, White Knights. That is someone who rescues a vulnerable corporation from a hostile takeover. That's what we have here. We have a hostile takeover of our country.
Yes, we do. Dov, we need to go into commercial break here. When we come back, more with Dov from NESARA, and we're going to be taking your questions. The number to call is 1-877-649-1112. That's 877-649-1112. We also have a couple of tickets for Sherry Carter Scott to be at the Woman of Wisdom, and that is on
that's Friday night at 7:30. So if you can get through the NESARA calls for those tickets, please do. The number 1-877-649-1112.
We'll be right back with NESARA and Dov.
Hi, this is Carolyn Mace, and you're listening to Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Cameron Steele.
And this is Lucia Minetti Steele.
And you're listening to Contact Talk Radio right here on News Channel 1150. Just think, we're actually giving this stuff about NESARA on the CNN News Channel in Seattle.
Yeah, and we're also worldwide on the internet, you know. So those of you who are across the world, across the globe, you're listening to Dev of Oneness with NESARA, about NESARA.
That's right, and NESARA being the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. So
right, and for more information on NESARA, it is www.nesara, NESARA.now.com. So
NESARAnow.com.
Right, so you can follow along with that website.
Yes. So we left off talking about the Florida fiasco, and why don't you inform us of what this is all about?
Okay. A few days on November 8th, the U.S. Supreme Court justices, as you can remember, we were hot in the middle of this recount issue.
Mm-hmm.
They were approached by CIA agents who were working for Bush Sr., the ex-president. And they were told that if it came necessary for a decision to be made by the U.S. Supreme Court, that they must select Bush Jr. They must do their decisions in such a way that Bush Jr. would end up in the Oval Office. And if they didn't, that Bush Sr. was fully prepared, he and his friends, to cause a civil war in this country. And now I want to remind you of what it looked like in Florida in those days. We saw people from the Gore camp outside the vote counting centers carrying signs, and we saw people from the Bush camp out there carrying signs. And we saw people get into fights from these two groups. That's not American. We don't do things that way. But if you remember, we saw people having shouting matches, practically getting into fisticuffs out on the street in front of these vote counting centers. And we heard words like conflict, and we heard words like possible civil war. Look at how mad these people are. We all remember that scene when those young rowdies, Republican rowdies, stormed the vote counting center in the hallway, tried to break into the vote counting center. Does anybody not remember that? That's crazy. Yeah. That's not Americans.
Do you know something, Dev? I have to tell you, I'm Canadian, and in case you didn't know this, and I've only lived in the States for now 2.5 years, actually, 3 years now, I think, and you know, when this whole election, I could not have take part in the election, of course, but when I watched this unfold and I saw the confusion at all, you know, Dad, I got to tell you, I was taken aback. I was speechless at the confusion of a government that is supposed to be running a country.
Right, and it wasn't. Whenever you see confusion, you see the dark agenda. That is where any minute you see confusion, you've got dark agenda activities going on. That's a total and complete truth. You can always see it because it doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense to any of us who were using our brains when we were watching television, and we were seeing these people down in Florida acting like idiots. Well, Americans don't act that way.
You know, and that's what I was going to say, is that when I was watching it, there was no confusion for me at all. It was very clear for me what was going on.
Right.
And, you know, and it's quite interesting that to perpetuate the confusion only disorientates the public. And, you know, so it's quite interesting to see that I'm sure that there are many people out there that were not confused, that were very clear in seeing what was going on, but didn't know what the heck to do about it.
Right. Well, and it was a CIA operation. We need to remember that Bush Sr. was the director of the CIA, and he had a career in the CIA. He was he was a manager in the CIA office in Dallas when JFK was shot. And they were involved in that as well, and that will come out after NESARA.
Dev, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. We have a caller who has a question. Caller, you there? Caller, you there?
Yes, I'm
Great.
here.
Hi, Karen from Seattle. Please go ahead, ask your question.
Hi. It's good to hear the Dove of Oneness on the radio. I've been following her website for a while. Glad to finally be able to hear her speak.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
My question is, once this happens, how, and everyone gets an influx of cash, why is anyone going to want to work, and where are we going to get all our stuff?
You're talking about in a year from about 15 months after NESARA, there'll be a massive wave of prosperity for people in major countries. What's going to happen is, first of all, and I've written about this, there are companies who have all kinds of technologies ready to take on certain kinds of things that need to be done. But there will also be new technologies that will totally eliminate the need for people to do work. Work, when you're forced to do it for a paycheck, is a very low spiritual survival. That is not going to allow us to make the great shift of the ages that we must make in these days.
Yes.
What is absolutely required, and Maslow, as a psychologist, said it, that people must get out of survival before they can look to higher projects, higher aspirations, higher focuses in their lives. And that is what is happening. And this is not the first time this has happened in the universe. This is something that happens periodically for whole civilizations to be lifted up. And it's our turn, and it's darn well time that we get this done. So a lot of things, for instance, teleportation will be very common. You won't need truck drivers driving all over the place. You won't need a lot of these different kinds of things that we use to move things around. There'll be different kinds of tools and technologies, and they're already available, and they've been sitting on the shelf for years waiting to come out, but they have been suppressed, as have the alternative energies, suppressed from coming out. So we're moving people out of a place of survival and having to work in a job you hate to a place where you have money and you do work as service. You do the things that your heart and your spirit says to you, do this to make your contribution in the world. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now that's 15 months after NESARA is announced that we'll start to see that happening in the U.S. and some of the other major countries, and then it will roll around the world within 4 years of NESARA being announced, I'm told. This will be our new reality.
Thank you, Karen, for your question. That was a good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to get back.
Yeah, go ahead, Dove.
Are you still there?
With the U.S. Supreme Court, they were threatened with civil war. The Bush regime made sure they knew from those rowdies storming the center, the vote counting center, and from some some other things that didn't get put in the news, that the Bush regime was Bush gang, headed by Senior and the Rockefellers, are very good buddies of his and work with him. And they were determined to make the Supreme Court bow to getting Junior into office. And they actually staged some attacks of Democratic headquarters in a couple of different states where people were hurt and the building was damaged in order to show that they were willing to pull their 40,000 CIA paramilitary people, and Bush Sr.'s been building his own paramilitary groups and cause a civil war in this country. And that's why the justices said, we don't have the power at this time to stop them. And they didn't. They didn't have the power in the U.S. military to stop them, which is the only place you're going to stop something like that. In an instant, that was the power they had to call upon. They have since had new allies come to the fore, and a great deal of help, and a great deal of the military has now become backers of NESARA because they see what the Bushes are doing to the country.
And I was just going to ask, how is this going to get passed with this type of opposition that we're experiencing now?
Well,
the Bush gang.
There's more and more intervention by the allies, and there's two kinds of allies. Time to do this. Okay. There's the Ascended Masters who work very hard on getting this done. Ascended Master Saint Germain is very busy on a daily basis working on getting this accomplished, and has an office outside of D.C., meets daily with white knights in D.C., with world leaders around the globe, with the Dark Agenda. Periodically, he meets with people from the Bush regime who try to finagle some kind of benefit for themselves when NESARA is announced and so on. This is very nuts and bolts. I first heard about the Ascended Masters being involved from someone who was sitting in the G8 meetings, the Global 8 meetings, the top 8 industrialized countries in the world. The leaders of those countries meet frequently, such as the head of Germany, head of the UK, head of Russia, head of the U.S. So this person has a job that requires him to be present in these meetings, and I was informed about Sananda, which is another name for Jesus the Christ, and Saint Germain beaming into these meetings periodically and informing the leaders that they were going to have to change, that this whole shift for the benefit of the people on the planet was happening, and they needed to prepare for it, and they could either cooperate or not, but they had to realize that it was happening. Ascended Masters don't kill people, by the way, so this is why, in general, I should say, so this is why the dark agenda leaders, the Bush regime and so on, don't pay a lot of attention, because they only worry if someone has the ability to kill them. Then they take them seriously. But in fact, the Ascended Masters have been very busy. They are working with world leaders around the globe in developing the agreements to move forward, in giving them the precious metals. The Ascended Masters have provided some of the precious metals that will be moved into various countries' treasuries so that they can all shift to a currency that is backed by precious metals. There's been much help from them. There's also help from benevolent ETs. And there are many, 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 many groups of ETs who are here. Some are not benevolent. Some have their own agenda. Some are here simply because what happens here causes problems other places. And they're here to protect their own families and loved ones in their own galaxies and universes from this kind of havoc that the Bush gang is potentially going to cause the destruction of this planet.
Well,
so there's help.
There is help, obviously. Now, NESARA has been up to be passed over the past couple of years.
No, it has been passed.
It has been passed
on March 9, 2000. It was signed by Clinton on October 10, 2000. It has been passed since then. Every time there's an election, there's new Congress people. The White Knights take NESARA back into Congress, and they have it passed again. And the reason for that is, this way no congressperson can say that this was not done, that they didn't know about it. They do know about it. After the fact, they will be allowed to talk about it. Until that time, there's a very strict gag order.
Okay. Now, let me ask you something. September 11th played a big part in NESARA.
Yes. On September 9, 2001, Congress passed joint resolutions approving NESARA. That was a Sunday session. It was a closed session, and there had been a great deal of foot dragging and so on, and even betrayals within the White Knights to cause us to get to that point in the calendar where finally we thought we had everything done and they would go ahead and announce NESARA. They didn't announce it on Monday, the 10th, because the White Knights have 3 days. Constitutionally, you can close the banks for 3 days. So they want to build a weekend into the time frame of when they're going to announce NESARA. If they were planning to announce it at 10 a.m. D.C. time, Greenspan was going to get on television and announce the new U.S. Treasury Bank system. That would be the beginning of it. And they would then have the banks closed Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then they would also have, legally, they would have Saturday and Sunday for the banks to do all the things they have to do to get ready to open up the following week as Treasury banks. What happened in 9/11, the reason the World Trade Center was hit instead of, for instance, one of the other buildings anywhere in the world, in the country rather, was because on the first and second floor of the first tower of the World Trade Center, there was an international banking center that was supposed to download data to all the U.S. banks to get them ready for NESARA, and that was supposed to start at 9 a.m. on September 11, 2001. So the first plane hit slightly before that, and then there were explosions and other things that actually brought the center down. And the second plane, the second tower was, I think the reason for that was because the Rockefellers needed to be able to cash in on their insurance policy. Mm-hmm. The Rockefellers had owned that until 2 weeks before, and they sold it to someone, the World Trade Center, and then they had an insurance policy that if the buyer didn't pay off on the loan, they would get this insurance money, and they did, of course, cash in on that. So they helped in providing access for the explosions in the bottom of the towers. That was one of the NESARA targets, was that huge banking center. That download of data was very important, and they wiped it out. They also wiped out financial records. It took months to recreate from those banking centers. Then, in addition, the Pennsylvania spot, if you saw the early reports, there was a white circle drawn on the ground, and in the middle of that was where the impact was. Underground, there's a facility that was part of moving out NESARA and part of the resources for NESARA, and that got damaged. The Pentagon, the exact spot that the plane, and it was a very small plane, not a commercial airliner, the commercial airliner that the government is lying to you and telling you went into the Pentagon, never was even close to the Pentagon.
Funny, there's no pictures of that either, you know?
Absolutely. And, I mean, it's almost shocking that we've allowed this government to get on with this for so long, but the truth is coming out. And that spot where they hit the Pentagon and where the explosions occurred, there was a small white plane that was remotely piloted by the CIA and some of their resources, and it was flown in at low altitude into the Pentagon. It was loaded with explosives, and it blew up the new, totally renovated and new Naval Communications Center. And the Naval Communications Center was the military's communication center for the support of NESARA activities. So that was where all of the things, where the different groups that were guarding all the gold were going to receive their orders to bring it into the government vaults and so on. That was the communication center that was doing all of that kind of coordination. It had to be destroyed.
Deb, we're going to have to stop you right there for a moment. We have to go to a commercial break. When we come back, we have very limited time, but we have another gentleman, Dave from Utah, who has a question for you. So we're going to try to get into that as much as possible. If we can't get all the way through that, we're going to carry this into the next day. So this is Contact Talk Radio. You're listening to Dove of Oneness with NESARA, and I'm Lucia Minetti Steele.
And this is Cameron Steele.
And we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Contact Talk Radio right here on 1150 AM or on your website at www.contactradio.info. And don't forget, the show today has been brought to you by CocoonNutrition.org. Stephen Hewer of CocoonNutrition.org is a big supporter of NESARA and wanted us to get NESARA on the air. And we're doing a two-part series tomorrow morning, 10:06 a.m., part 2 of Dove from NESARA. So let's get back to Dove, and we have a caller.
Hello, Dave. Are you there?
I am.
Wonderful. Well, please say hello to Dove and ask your question.
Hi, Dove. I'm Dave, and I've been a subscriber to your newsletter for some time predating the tragedy in New York. And Cameron and Lucia, I want to thank you for your vision in opening a forum for, shall we say, less than mainstream information. And Dove, I want to thank you for your persistence and tenacity in disseminating this information. Now, my question is, in your recent information, you have discussed the extension of a window for the announcement of NESARA. That last announcement does not include the period that we are in now. So I am very curious what that looks like now, and how can those of us that have been watching this process, shall we say, for the last 2.5 years, other than a sense of faith, know that we're looking at a bunch of carrots and not a picture of a bunch of carrots?
Well, first of all, if you read the confirming information that I have, I think I have something like 15 pages of emails that people have sent me or letters I've quoted from people who have already confirmed NESARA is real. If you read this week, a woman went into Social Security and she confirmed with the Social Security representative that the National Economic Security and Reformation Act was real, and this representative from Social Security said, yes, I've been trained on it, but not as much as the people at the IRS have, of course. So you see, we do have all over the place confirmation from people. You can go into Walmart, and if you talk to a checker who's been there since July, they will say, yeah, we were trained that we were going to be exchanging the new money for the old, that the new money was coming out.
Well,
there's a law that requires that to be done. That's not something the Treasury...
Did you hear that, Dove? Did you hear that, Dove? Dave actually confirmed this with his local postmaster.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, NESARA is confirmable. What we need is for the white knights to get very serious and power up and get this thing out and quit sitting on it.
Dave, you were going to mention something else. Is there something else you'd like to say?
Well, I very much concur with Dove in that the white knights need
Dave, we are in the current window. The window is current for everything.
I just had not heard that the window had been extended.
The window that the international contracts were assigned, specified for NESARA being announced. We are in that window. We have been for a while. There's a fairly large window.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your call. Dave from Utah. So listen, now we have...
We have to wrap this up because we've come to the end of our program, but this is going to be continued on tomorrow at 10:06, right back here, KKNW, 1150 AM in Seattle, and worldwide on the internet, www.contactradio.info.
Now, just remember, folks, this show is going to be in the archive section, so if you just joined us, it will be in the archives in a very short time, and you can listen to the show again. Dove, will you stick around for a moment?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Dove, for coming on board today. Thank you, Stephen Hewer, for Cocoon Nutrition, for sponsoring this program. CocoonNutrition.org, folks. I've been using the Cocoon GH for some time now, and I just love it. More energy, more of everything. And he's a big supporter of NESARA. In fact, as soon as he came on board as a regular sponsor, he phoned me a week later and said, listen, I want to sponsor you guys for NESARA because I'm a big supporter of NESARA, and this information has to get out there. So,
and I'm sure many of you that are listening who've never heard of NESARA before, your jaws are on the floor. I'm positive of that because I know mine was the first time I heard about it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about more of this tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning, yeah.
Tomorrow morning. What we're going to do in support of NESARA, again, we're going to go ahead and give out their website so you can read up more about this. It's NESARA, NESARA now, NOW.com. Again, that's NESARAnow.com. And please read up on it. Give us a call tomorrow with any questions, or email us with any questions, and we'll bring them up with Dove tomorrow.
And the other thing I just want to mention quickly is that once you get to that site, join the email list because you'll get daily emails and updates of what's happening.
Absolutely. What we're going to do in support of Women of Wisdom this week, that's happening all week long, we're going to be playing another song from their collection, the Women of Wisdom collection, number 9, I Ain't Afraid, performed by Holly Near.
I Ain't Afraid.
I Ain't Afraid.
So there you go. Thank you very much, folks, and we'll see you tomorrow. Welcome to Contact Talk Radio. This is Cameron Steele.
And this is Lucia Minetti Steele.
And of course, we're here to... what are we doing?
This is part 2 of the NESARA topic.
That's right.
And this is brought to us by Cocoon Nutrition. Stephen Hewer of Cocoon Nutrition. Cocoon Nutrition is actually they're sponsoring both shows.
They're sponsoring both shows.
Right.
Yes, part 1 and part 2 is sponsored by Cocoon Nutrition. So this is a sponsored-based show, and we are your hosts. A couple of things have come in since yesterday's show, and we want to first of all want to thank all the skeptics out there, which by the way have not been very many.
When you look at the people who've been emailing in that are in support versus those who are the skeptics, it's really far out of balance.
Right, it is. And somebody emailed us if I believe. And you know something, it's not my place to say whether I believe or disbelieve. What we are doing here and why we are bringing NESARA out onto the radio waves here is for you folks at home and listening to us in the car or the internet or wherever you're listening to us on, to make up your own minds about NESARA. Do the investigation. Do what it takes to find out what your truth is in this. And if this stuff doesn't resonate with you, then it doesn't resonate with you.
So be it.
So be it. Mm-hmm. We're here just to give the information out. And certainly that statement is a very diplomatic statement, but it's not our place to make a judgment on what is right and what is wrong. I mean,
the information's not about us.
It's not about us.
It's not about Cameron. It's not about Lucia, and it's certainly not about Dove. It's about NESARA.
It's about NESARA and the information that's coming through. I do want to say though that maybe we are all wrong on this whole thing, NESARA, the whole New Age mumbo jumbo. Maybe this is all just an escape from reality for people. And you know what? If it is, we'll find out. But what if it's not? Mm-hmm. What if it offers people faith, hope, and a desire to live on?
Absolutely.
It's kind of like that placebo effect. It's you give somebody a pill and says this is going to cure all, and that person gets cured. Don't tell them it's a placebo. Let them live their life and be happy about it.
That has been documented.
And if it's and that's right. And if it's a scam, then it's a lesson learned that we haven't learned yet. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm going to say, because we're here to learn lessons. And
if anything, this is giving hope to people. The NESARA is giving hope to people. If it's fiction or reality, this is not promoting fear.
Right.
This is simply not promoting fear.
So, having said that, we have Dove with us on the phone. Welcome back to Contact Talk Radio, Dove.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's recap a little bit now. People have emailed us. Not a lot of people. People have emailed us, though, regarding NESARA, and they're talking about they went to NESARA.org, and according to what you said yesterday...
Exactly. It's not the real NESARA.
Okay, now let's talk about that, and what is the difference?
Okay, huge difference. First of all, the real NESARA is over 500 pages long, and it contains whole sections that are not even begun to be hinted at on the information on the Internet. And people... I'm going to tell you straight out, most Americans do not understand what a gag order is from the U.S. Supreme Court. Americans have this mythology that they can get on the Internet and find out the truth about anything. Lie, false, wrong. When you have the top legal experts in the country putting a gag order on something, believe me, the lid is down on those people who have the authority to give you documentation or proof about this. You will not find it on the Internet until the announcement is officially made. End of discussion.
Okay,
Now, let me talk about NESARA.org. NESARA.org is owned by the Bush gang. They are the enemies of NESARA, because they lose their New World Order actions when NESARA goes into place. It is the death knell of the New World Order. It kills it. Dead. Right there, right then. The head is cut off the monster. So, the Bush gang has that NESARA.org disinformation website out there to confuse your people. And I have said again and again, you go to that website, you're going to get lies. First of all, they have taken information they know about the true NESARA law, and they have warped it, they have revised it, they have put disinformation out there, they have changed details, everything to confuse the people. Let's remember, Bush Sr. was director of the CIA. What does the CIA do? It does a great deal of disinformation. It does a great deal of brainwashing of the American people. The CIA had Project Mockingbird, for heaven's sake. Mm-hmm. Look that up in your Internet web search, folks, and find out that the CIA has a documented Freedom of Information Act secret about, and it has now come out, because it's enough years, that they control the media. Do your research. Quit being idiots. Pay attention. The CIA also had another terrorist training program called Operation Cyclone. Do your research. Learn about your government. And then look at the players. Look at the hostile takeover we had in December 2000 when the U.S. Supreme Court was threatened with a civil war by the Bush regime, by the Bush gang, by Bush Sr. and the Rockefellers, and all those people who've been working with them to get Bush Jr. into power. NESARA is the end of the New World Order. It's the end of the global domination plans that the Bushes have put out there, that they have been attempting to do for years. This is the end of it. This is why the struggle is so intense, and this is why there is disinformation out there. They don't want the American public to know what's really going on. Because if the American public really knew, and if the media was not controlled by the CIA and the Bush regime, the Americans would be stomping in the streets demanding NESARA immediately.
Now, NESARA, once it actually is put into effect, this would actually oust the president, the current president, and Cheney, correct?
Exactly. But if it had gone into effect when Clinton was in office, it would have done the same thing.
Understood. Now, with that, now it's saying also that NESARA would be appointing a president.
There is a constitutionally acceptable NESARA designate president and vice president who have already been contacted. This is their job. This is what they must do. They must step into these positions to hold the reins until we have new elections in 90 to 120 days after the official announcement.
Oh, okay.
Now to help me understand, and I'm sure the public too, how can this happen without the public vote for the new president and vice president?
Because if there was such a thing as mass treason, which there is, and these people were found to be guilty of mass treason, which they have been in a private process by the U.S. Supreme Court, they would have to be removed, and there would be a constitutional succession. And that is what these designates are based on. They are constitutionally acceptable to step into those positions.
Now, let me ask you something, Dov. This information, obviously, I mean, we've been calling this information secret, and of course there's a gag order on this. How is it that you're able to attain all this information?
There is a gag order on the officials who are involved. Anyone who has officially been involved in this has had to sign documentation. There were people in naval intelligence and other parts of the White Knights, I'll say, who don't necessarily agree with this gag order. They don't see it being helpful, and they have leaked information to me, to some other people, telling us this is happening, telling this needs to be done. Since then, I have created a worldwide network of contacts over the last 3 years to research this and to follow each step of the process. And I have some very unusual contacts. And I do not have my signature on a secrecy agreement. They cannot use the gag order on me. I am not an official person. But I will say this, I am supposed to be doing this work, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing this world service because the more light we put on the subject, the faster this is going to get done. It forces the people who are in control to keep moving it forward. Mm-hmm. When everything is under a blanket and nobody knows what's really going on, movement is slow. But the people who are involved in this, the top bankers, some of them support this, top international bankers, some of them support this. Some country leaders, surprisingly, support this. Not all of them are bad, turns out. But we certainly have them in our country. We have the bad apples here. People who have interest in getting these improvement projects, who put up the original capital to build these huge amount of funds, to get the monies to back the Treasury Bank and to back the improvement projects, they're anxious to get this done. Most of them know who I am, and they listen to what I have to say because I'm telling them the truth. I don't 100% support everything the White Knights do, and when they get out of line and they don't move forward fast enough, I tell people they're not moving forward fast enough. And I say, get on the phone, call your White Knight contact, and tell them, get the lead out, get this done.
Okay, now there was a question yesterday, a couple of questions that I want to ask you, and some came in last night through the email. First question was, it's actually more of a statement and a question, Duff. You mentioned yesterday that Clinton had signed the, forgive me if I can't remember off the top.
He signed the act in October of 2000.
Right. Now, if Clinton signed the act of October of 2000, this person that emailed said that this would automatically bring it into a law.
Yeah, but you know what? You know how many laws are out there that have been passed that have never been implemented?
So you're saying it's been passed but it hasn't been implemented.
Exactly.
What does it take to be implemented then?
It takes the announcement. The announcement does a number of things. First of all, the announcement puts us back into constitutional law. The next thing the announcement does, these are the pieces of the announcement. There's a piece that talks about returning to constitutional law. The next thing on the list is the films of the Bush and Cheney resignations. Now, people say, why would they do a film of resigning if they don't want to do this? Because they pretend to be lawful people. They pretend to go by the law. The World Court has said you will do this. The world community of leaders knows that this is in place and ready to go. So they they pretend to cooperate while at the same time doing things on the other side of the road to cause problems.
Now,
those films are already in place.
Now, seeing this Clinton had signed this, how do we know as the people, or as people that are part of NESARA, know that Clinton signed this?
I had that confirmed by an NSA agent who didn't believe it and did his research and found the documentation in the super secret confidential files of the government. And I have confirmation from many other white knight sources. For example, let me tell you another law that was passed that's never been implemented. You might remember this. The law that you had to have your thumbprint on your driver's license. Never been implemented in the country. That was passed. A few states made a run at it. Most people in various states got up in arms and stopped it. It has been extended to the year, I think another couple of years for it to be implemented.
Okay.
This is not unusual for laws to get passed, to get signed, and not be implemented. This is and again, I'm telling you, this is a fight. When you look at what NESARA does, it ends the power of the New World Order. The bankers who are largely part, in the old days especially, major bankers, very much part of the New World Order, this global domination thing. And remember, war makes them a lot of money, so they have been behind the wars. They lose all those special powers with the new international banking laws and the new U.S. banking laws. They don't have the ability to do the things they've been doing.
Now, Dov, this is something that we did on our own last night after hearing from you and hearing that this Dave from Utah had called and said he went to his local post office and he mentioned this. Now, we had called two different banks yesterday and they didn't know what we were talking about.
No, and you won't get that way. You will get it if you talk to a checker at Walmart who is there at least since last July, a checker at Safeway, your U.S. Postal people. But you won't get it from banks because they've signed the secrecy agreement. And unless you are a personal, longtime friend, and this banker, who is president of a bank, is willing to jeopardize his career and his life to tell you something, you're not going to get the answer.
Okay, now, let's get this straight, because I want to invite people to go out and do this. I'd like to invite people to go out and do this and give us back the information that they have, feedback on it, because we want to, there are skeptics out there, and believe it, Deb, we've had a few emails, and an interesting thing is that we haven't had a lot of emails from skeptics, but,
Cameron, let's just pay attention to the fact that people are more inclined to be pessimistic than optimistic.
Dov, I totally understand that.
So the first thing, anyone, when it comes to change, what's the first thing that people respond
to? Well, they have to look for
denial.
Denial. I just want to mention this, Dov, because people are asking us questions about it. So
and I want to tell you the 10 ways, if you have the right relationships, that you can confirm NESARA for yourself.
Okay.
You have to have a close personal relationship with a bank president, and it can't be somebody at the lower level. It has to be at the top.
Okay.
They're the ones who sign the authorizations for the computer systems changes. So most banks have kept it at the top. A few banks have not been that restrictive. A few banks have been a little more friendly and a little more open, but that changes with the politics and with whether or not they get a notice from the Treasury Department telling them to shut up, which some of the banks have. So you have to have a personal relationship with people. If you know someone in management in the Federal Reserve Bank system, some of those will tell you. If you have a friend, a close personal friend who's a senior stockbroker or manages a stock brokerage firm, and you have a close relationship